I'm really very happy that you are here with us today and will share your thoughts on this subject with all of us. Well, I have the advantage of knowing him very well, but I will correct that, knowing him for the years that I interacted with him and to the extent that I did. Because you never get to know a person completely. So I know him as well as I could. I would still like to briefly introduce him to you because many of you may not be aware about the kind of work that he has done and what he has done over all these years. He was a professor, teacher, trainer, researcher, and advisor of management and organization behavior at the IIM Ahmedabad from 1985, I correct myself, 85, not 86, till November 2006, when he retired after reaching the mandatory age of superannuation. He's a citizen activist for improving democracy and governance in the country, but has other interesting hobbies as well. He's a bird watcher, a conservationist, and as I said, a trained lawyer. Before becoming a professor, he was an engineer manager with the Indian Railways. And in fact, I first met him at the Railway Staff College in Baroda, if I'm not mistaken. And he worked as an international marketing manager for 4 years. Having worked long at the railways, he probably also understood very well what many in our country talk of the second government of India. It used to be fashionable to refer to the Indian Railways as another government of India in those days. But of course, I should also mention to you that he got into the Indian Railways after graduating from a very, very elite institution which was established in India by the government at a place called Jamalpur, where each year they would select 6, 8 graduates from the country and put them through a rigorous training program and ultimately absorb them into the Indian Railway Service. And perhaps I am not wrong in saying that most of the most outstanding managers who became the chairman of the Railway Board in India were graduates of this institution. Professor Chokar has taught in several countries, including Australia, France, Japan, and the United States. His professional interests cover all aspects of organizational functioning, cross-cultural management, international marketing, international management, international business, human resource management. I'm actually quoting what he writes about himself, so it's quite a long list. If I were to add my own, it'll get even longer. His broader interests include electoral and political reforms, informed choice, world affairs, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, bird watching. His research work has appeared in very prestigious journals and in edited volumes. And we hope that he will continue to drive the change in politics and governance that he, with a few others, initiated so many years ago. It's my great pleasure to welcome him again to this university and deliver the second lecture on the ailing Indian polity perspectives and challenges. We would like to welcome him with a bouquet of flowers, and I request Professor Trivedi to hand over this bouquet to him. I think I've spoken enough. Praful Bhai always says I speak too much. but I thought that I should acquaint you better with Professor Chokar, and therefore I took this liberty of spending a little more time. I now request Professor Chokar to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
Got a glass of water should not cause you any worry. I don't plan to speak too much. I speak very little, but then we'll perhaps have a interactive session. It's really a pleasure to be introduced by a person who knows you inside out. And I was a bit disappointed when he started reading what I write for myself, because you learn to market yourself. But he had done such a good job even before that, that was redundant. And of course I have no doubt whether what should I call him. He is obviously always has been and will be Professor Kalro, because he was the dean who made the mistake of recruiting me for IIM Ahmedabad, and I stuck on even after he left. I have also had the privilege of being trained by the railways in the same institution that several years before me, his own brother was trained. So we have a longer connection which we did not know till I came here, and I found that I had only heard of one Kalro. When I heard of another Kalro, I said, "Are you related to that man?" He said, "I am his brother." So we go back a long way, therefore you should discount all the good things that he has said about me. Coming back to the topic, annihilation Indian polity, perspectives and actions, I am a bit overawed by the fact that Lord Bhikkhu Parekh spoke before me. I am obviously no match on him. He is an intellectual of great caliber. I am more of, if anything, activist. In political realm, I have had no theoretical preparation, although in the last 10, 12, 13 years I have been reading and I have read textbooks on political science, including books written by Lord Bhikkhu Parekh and some other people. But the understanding you get by pursuing a discipline formally, like I did law, is different from what you get when you read it on your own. So I will perhaps give you an action-oriented perspective on the Indian polity. But having been a professor for so long, where I sort of landed by accident, one cannot avoid reflecting on things that one experiences and sees. So I'll do that during the course of whatever I share with you. Professor Kalro started or mentioned governance. When we first got into this act, it was actually governance which was bothering one of our colleagues, who was then also here. He went to Bangalore subsequently. And the period was around 98, 99, when a lot was being said in the media about criminals getting into politics. And this person, who was about 14, 15 years younger than I am, he would get more worked up than I did. I also used to get worked up, but for about more useless things than he got worked up about serious things. And I spent about 3-4 months trying to persuade him not to get involved in this activity, but he succeeded and I joined him in getting involved, so you find me where I am. So we found that to become a member of parliament, you had to give only 4 pieces of information: your name, your husband's or father's name, your postal address, and your voter registration number. When I joined the railway several years ago, I remember filling up about 25, 30 sheets of paper. To get a passport, I am sure all of you know what it takes, because every Gujarati has been abroad. And so on and so forth. So we started finding out what do people know about those who contest elections. And in that year, L.K. Advani and T.N. Seshan were contesting elections from the Gandhinagar constituency, of which IIM campus was a part. And some of us, out of mischief, said we will not vote for any of these two we will vote for somebody else. And we had no end of difficulty finding out who the other candidates were. Finally, we found out their names, but we wanted to know who are these people, what do they do? There was no way of knowing that. Around the time a report was published by the Law Commission of India titled Reform of the Electoral Laws. And I read about this report in the newspapers and found it to be very persuasive and interesting. And we got hold of a copy, and when we read those, we thought this was a wonderful document. And one of the recommendations was that people who have pending criminal cases against them, they should be barred from contesting elections. So there was no way of knowing who had criminal cases pending against him or her. So in our naivety, we filed a public interest litigation in Delhi High Court saying that candidates contesting elections should be required to declare if they have any criminal cases pending against them, and this information should be made available to people. That was the start of our journey into this whole Indian polity business. The Delhi High Court said it should be done, and to cut the long story short, we were happy that the matter was done and we could go back to our academic work, which we were still continuing to do. But to our surprise, the Union of India decided to appeal against that decision in the Supreme Court. So we were forced to become what is now, I know, what is now called respondent. So we contested the case in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also said, yes, it should be done. The appeal of the Union of India was rejected. We again thought our job was done and we could quit. But then we discovered that the Parliament was planning to amend the law because there was an all-party meeting attended by 22 political parties on 8th of July 2002. I still remember the date. And they decided that this judgment of the Supreme Court will not be allowed to be implemented and the law will be amended. The law could not be amended because the Parliament session was curtailed due to what was called a petrol pump scam. At that time, there was a gentleman, if I may use the term, Ram Nayak, who was the petroleum minister. He had allotted petrol pumps to some of his cronies, and the Parliament was stalled and then adjourned. Then we learned that the government was trying to issue an ordinance. Those of you who read the Constitution of India would know that an ordinance is issued when there is a dire emergency and threat to the nation, but the Parliament is not in session. So this fact of candidates contesting elections having to declare their criminal cases which are pending against them was considered to be a dire emergency by the Parliament and the government. So an ordinance went to the President. Of course, several people had met the President and warned him because Abdul Kalam had been elected President recently and he was considered to be a non-political person. So about 30 people met him from all over the country and told him that this ordinance might be unconstitutional. He returned the ordinance, but the next day the Attorney General took it to him and then he had to sign it under the convention. So the law stood amended. We challenged that amendment of the law in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court declared that amendment unconstitutional and null and void on 13th of March 2003. So beginning December 99 till March 2003 was the period during which we learnt what does it mean to do anything related to politics. And since then I started paying attention to politics as an individual. Of course, as Professor Kalro said, I ended up doing law, so I was a student of Gujarat University, which is now your competing university. So I did LLB from Gujarat University and now I am a practicing lawyer. But why I told you this is, I can tell you that the Indian polity is certainly ailing. But as a student of organizations, I have also often dabbled in this topic called organizational effectiveness. How do we say that an organization is effective? Several years ago, a couple of people, Peters and Waterman, Tom Peters and Robert Waterman wrote a book called In Search of Excellence, where they analyzed 10 most successful companies over the last 25 years and drew out lessons for excellence. That book became a rage, and the McKinsey model of 7S became a very popular model. But after 10 years, those 10 companies or 25 companies did not exist. So assessing organizational effectiveness is a very complex thing. As a student of organizations, I have tried to assess the effectiveness of political parties and effectiveness of an organization which we might conceive of as Government of India. It's very difficult, pretty much impossible. When you try and assess the effectiveness of Indian democracy, it is even more difficult. Lord Parekh obviously can do a better job of that. But in my way of thinking, one way of assessing the effectiveness of an organization is to compare it with other similar organizations. So if we follow that metric and decide to compare Indian democracy with its neighborhood, so we can start from the extreme south. We have a country called Sri Lanka, which is also a democracy. We can go anti-clockwise and come all the way to Afghanistan, Pakistan. And I believe that Indian democracy in a very good shape as compared to its neighborhood. The other appropriate reference point could be countries which became free and got rid of the colonial rule around the same time in the 40s and 50s. I am sure a lot of you are not old enough to remember that time. Some of us are, and most of them are sitting in the front rows actually. If we do that comparison, we also find that there are very few countries in the world who became free in the 40s and the 50s and have continued to be democracies uninterruptedly. India has that unique distinction. So I want to tell you, the young friends here particularly, yes, Indian democracy is ailing, and I am the first one, and I will tell you horrifying stories which happened subsequent to 2003, personal experiences of what is wrong with Indian democracy. But that is not with the intention of condemning Indian democracy. The fact is that we are trying to make Indian democracy better than what it is currently, what it has been over the last 20, 30 years. And the most eloquent testimony to the strength of Indian democracy is that people like me, people like my colleagues, we continue to do what we are doing. We have permission from the government to do what we are doing. We have a registration by the Ministry of Home Affairs to do what we are doing. Of course, once in a while we have some minor pinpricks, but we are free to do what we want. After our High Court and Supreme Court judgments in 1999 to 2003, a group in Bangladesh they asked us for copies of our petition. They filed the same petition in Bangladesh. They got a decision from the Supreme Court to do exactly what we had done here. Their election commission could not and did not implement it. And I met this person about 3 months ago in a conference in Bangalore, and he said all his supporters have disappeared and he is worried how long will he live. I have no such worry so far. So Indian democracy is in good shape, but we need to make it better, and we need to look at the situation how the Indian polity today is. And I would submit to you that the Indian polity today is in a major convulsion. Actually, I wrote a piece recently for India Today Digital saying that Indian democracy has started convulsing. I first thought I should title it Indian Democracy Convulses. Then I thought that that could be interpreted to mean, since in law I understood that interpretation is a key thing, that could be interpreted to mean that Indian democracy convulsed, and it has convulsed. So I am describing that convulsion. So I said it has started convulsing. The events of the last 2 or 3 years, I think, have brought Indian democracy at a juncture where what in Sanskrit and I suppose in Gujarati too is called manthan. There is a huge turmoil in the Indian polity. Now, whether that turmoil is a result of the ailment that it has suffered for so long, and now a surgical process is going on, and we don't know what will happen. Every surgery, having undergone a quadruple bypass 15 years ago, I realized that every single surgery has an undeterminable outcome. The surgical process may be standardized, but every body, every human organism reacts differently. Indian polity is an organism the kind of which does not exist, has not existed ever. I don't know whether it will exist in future or not, but it has not. A complexity of the type that India represents, where this fascinating dream of every person having an equal vote was put into effect 60 odd years ago. Women did not get a vote in Scandinavian countries till India got it, or till after India got it. So Indian democracy is a tremendous, tremendous challenge for all of us, more for you folks. Another of my favorite things that I say is that, for people like me, it is another 5, 10, 15, at the most 20 years. But for people like you, maybe 50% of you will go out of the country and to go to the promised land. From Gujarat, more people go. But, 50% of you, 30% of you will have to live here for 60, 70 years. It is imperative for you to do something that this democracy becomes healthier and healthier. To say that, we can do something and democracy will be healthy and then we can sort of rest in peace is not going to happen, because there is a very well-known saying that democracy is not a destination, it is a journey. And every citizen has to work for it all the time. The recent experiments that have been going on in Delhi, particularly the so-called Aam Aadmi Party, a lot of people ask about that, and I should preempt that question and sort of share my view. I have worked with these people who run the Aam Aadmi Party for the last 10, 15 years. But because we are a political reform organization, we are apolitical and we are equidistant from all political parties. So ever since they formed a party, we don't work with them. But the success or failure of this experiment is not dependent either on a single party or a single person. This churning in Indian democracy, I think, began some 15, 20 years ago. Very, very slowly. It has now come to the surface. And this group of people have a leading role for the time being. But let us be clear, theirs is not the only role. It is not X versus the rest of India. Whole of India is playing this role. In this churning of Indian democracy, all political parties have a role to play, and they are actually playing it, whether we believe it or not. Every single political party, however regional, however small, is playing a role. The media is playing a role. The so-called intelligentsia, people like us, are playing a role. The corporate world is playing a role. But the most important role is actually being played, whether passively or actively, by the citizenry of the country. If the citizens of the country don't work to repair this ailment, it is not going to be repaired. So it is an experiment which is not a one-day affair. One action of the Delhi government is not going to determine whether it succeeds or fails. Even the 2014 Lok Sabha elections are not going to determine that. It can fail any day, the experiment. Those of you who do experiments in laboratories would know. You know, if you do a long-term experiment, it can fail at any point. But for it to succeed, it takes time. So the rebuilding of Indian democracy is not a one-day or one election project. It is perhaps 2 or 3 election cycles. If this experiment is going to work, it will take maybe 5, 10 or 15 years. And after 10 or 15 years, we can perhaps see that Indian polity is healthier than it was in 2013. The Supreme Court and some other agencies have played their role. Beginning with June 3rd last year, there have been a series of decisions, which is a very interesting phenomenon. There was a decision by the Central Information Commission and as many as 5 judgments, 4 by the Supreme Court, 1 by a High Court, which have contributed to a movement in this direction. However, only one of them has resulted some change on the ground. All the others are still work in process. And let me share one, after which I will stop and we will have questions. In 2000 when we started doing this work in 1999, 2003, we found that candidates had a lot of criminal cases against them. They had money, their wealth was very high. And in 5 years, the wealth would increase 400%, 1000%. And we shared this data with people at large through the media and everything. So in 2004, there were 125 members of the Lok Sabha who had criminal cases pending against them. Came 2009 and we thought we had succeeded. And we discovered there were 162. So we got a shock, saying, what have we been doing all this time? And then we discovered that how does a person contest election? Has any of you thought of contesting an election amongst the youth? So before contesting an election, what do you need to do? Yeah. Sorry? Loudly. Assuming you are 25 years of age. Anyway, let me make it simple in the interest of time. I don't want to conduct a class here, although I would love to. You know, you need the nomination from a political party. Although technically there can be independent candidates, but historically the number of independent candidates and the number of independent candidates elected has been going down. There is data for the last several years. So you need to be a serious contender in an election, you need to have a ticket. So how do you get a ticket? By pleasing the party. Or by satisfying the party that you can win. So you must have winnability. This is a new word That is in circulation now. Winnability. Now, when you say the party, whom do you mean? Few leaders. The high command. It varies from one to many. How many? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there is a group of people who give out these tickets for a variety of considerations, some mentionable and some not mentionable. So once you get a ticket, then we come into play. I didn't ask that question here. I mean, I have asked this question to thousands of audiences in the last 10 odd years. I ask people, where does the government come from? And the able answer is, we elect the government. You know, this tells us the depth to which democracy has taken root in this country. A common citizen, an illiterate citizen, a highly educated citizen, a poorest person and one of the richest people. I have not asked Mukesh Ambani, but I have asked several rich people. They also say we elect the government. But whom do we elect? People we vote for, are they our free choice? They have been chosen by political parties before we exercise our choice. Assuming there are 6 parties, we have 6 candidates. We have to choose one of the 6. So the choice of the voter is pre-constrained by the choices made by political parties as a group. So when Professor Kalro says, sorry sir to disagree with you, that we get the government we deserve, as in the British days we used to say, I beg to disagree sir, we get the government that the political parties allow us to choose from. So you get a ticket by pleasing the political party, you get elected by pleasing the electorate, again through a variety of means, some mentionable, some non-mentionable. You go into parliament or state assembly. Can you vote for or against a bill depending on your choice? Why are you shaking your head, young lady? Why can't you vote for your choice? Because of what is called the anti-defection law. There is a law in the country under Schedule 10 of the Constitution which says that if a member of parliament or state assembly votes against the whip issued by the party, his or her membership can be terminated. So the fact of the matter is, the choice that a voter supposedly makes is pre-constrained by the choices made by political parties, and the choice that an elected legislator makes is completely controlled by the political party. And political party, as my friend just said, is a few people. Are political parties democratic in their functioning? No. But they are the pillars of democracy and the defenders of democracy. Any time somebody does something, they say this is endangering democracy. We will protect it. They protect it by preventing the parliament from functioning. The way a world power was bringing peace to Iraq by waging war. So we discovered that the real players in the game are the political parties. Obviously they are not internally democratic, that we all know, but we wondered, how do they work? Where do they get the money from? So we applied to the Central Board of Direct Taxes seeking copies of income tax returns of political parties. After 2-3 years of struggle, in the final hearing in the CIC, by that time I had already become a lawyer and I thought I will now go and argue. I found there were 10 lawyers representing various political parties. One party had flown in two senior advocates from Madras, Chennai I should say, to protest or to prevent their income tax returns being made public. But after those hearings, after 2.5 years, we got copies of those returns. When we scrutinized them, we discovered that political parties had declared thousands of crores of annual income, but they had not paid any tax, no income tax. So we were quite shocked, but then we made further inquiries and discovered that the Indian Income Tax Act has a section called Section 13, which grants 100% exemption from income tax to political parties. Well, the law of the land exists and we work under the law, within the law. But that law has a provision, which as a lawyer now I like to say it has a proviso, which is that a political party must maintain its accounts and submit a list of donations of rupees 20,000 each or more to the Election Commission of India. So we went to the Election Commission of India and filed an RTI application, got a copy of this list of donations. We totaled up the donations and we compared that total of each political party with the income that it had declared in the income tax return. And we found only 20 to 25% of the income was explained by donations on an average of all political parties. So 75 to 80% of the income was from sources which were not known. Again, we were surprised. We wrote to political parties under RTI saying, please tell us who gave you these donations. And we got a letter saying, we are not under RTI, we are not a public authority, so we do not have to respond to this. That is when we went to the Central Information Commission and said that political parties should be declared as public authorities under RTI. Information Commission said that we need to know why you are saying so. So we set about collecting information. How Mr. Pillai here does not like the information, right to information law, but we have been using it from time to time, sorry. So we went to several government agencies like Director of Estates in Delhi, which allots government housing and offices and lands to people. We asked them how many houses are allotted to political parties and what is the rent that they pay. And we compared to the market rent of those houses. We went to All India Radio and Doordarshan, how much time for speeches is given during election time. We went to the Election Commission, what facilities do they give to political parties and what is their market value. We calculated the tax that they should be paying on their income, because the tax which is not paid is money foregone by the government or by the people. So we put together all this information, presented it to the Central Information Commission. Once again there were lawyers representing political parties and there were 3 or 4 hearings. On 3rd of June, the Central Information Commission said 6 national political parties are public authorities under the law, under the RTI Act. So this gentleman here was about to clap. We also clapped. But we discovered that that was not the end of the story. Political parties said, I was about to say, who the hell is the Central Information Commission to declare as public authorities? So the first thought was, we thought they will go to court. Because if they go to court, we are quite sure we will succeed. Because there are 4 pieces of definition, 4 items of definition, and we have data to prove each of them for these 6 national parties. But the political parties are smarter than all of us put together. They said, we will not go to court, we will amend the law. So we were back to 2003, when all political parties had amended the Representation of People Act. So they drew up a bill to amend the Right to Information Act. It was introduced in the Lok Sabha, but there was some jhagada in the Lok Sabha. It was sent to a committee. The committee has had several sittings. We also appeared before it, gave a long written submission. On the 17th of December, the committee gave its report recommending that the RTI Act be amended. It has a dissent note by a nominated member of Rajya Sabha by the name Annu Aga, who is a corporate head. She used to be the chairperson and managing director of a company called Thermax India. She had attached a 3.5-page dissent note, but the recommendation is with the government, with the parliament. We have been arguing that the recommendation should be rejected and the RTI Act should not be amended. So, the political class, if I may say so, is kind of hell-bent on trying to keep the functioning of the country, the governance of the country for itself. In that, it is aided and abetted by several of us. Some parts of the media are aiding them, abetting them. Some parts of the corporate sector are aiding and abetting them, certainly not Annu Aga and Thermax, and a whole lot of other NGOs. So, political governance of the country is critical to everything else. People also talk about police reforms. We have some very good friends who do that. There was a Supreme Court judgment on police reforms in a case filed by one person, Mr. Prakash Singh, who was a retired Director General of Police. 8 years have gone by, nothing has happened. So, there is no dearth of what should be done. The challenge, friends, lies in how to get it done. And since I used to teach in a business school, strategy formulation is a very good thing. Every textbook on strategy, with due deference to Praful Bhai, who is an older teacher or more senior teacher of strategy than I have ever been, every textbook on business strategy has 10 chapters on strategy formulation and 2 on implementation. Because strategy formulation is a challenging, intellectual, exciting, glamorous exercise. Strategy implementation is taking off your coat, getting into the trenches, dirtying your feet and hands. So, removing the element in the Indian polity, the challenge is how to implement good things. That requires a marathon race, not a 100 meters race. And my friends, let me end by saying only young folks can run marathons. People at my age cannot. So it's for you guys. Indian democracy is in good shape, but unless we nurse it, unless we improve it, it will decay. And the future of the country, obviously, and of democracy is in your hands. Please take care of it. Thank you. Yeah, any questions, you are welcome. As a matter of fact, I will welcome questions. How much time do we have? Well, can I give preference to younger people, sir? The democracy man? Yeah.
The question about the recently giving a Telangana, remote Telangana separation, sir. People of Andhra have worked hard for Telangana, and it's like giving a part of hard working to a person not about hard at all. So, your views, like Andhra people are not happy with the separation, and even the democratic feeling has not been given to the people over there. People want democracy, the democratic feeling that we don't want Andhra. So where is the democracy over there? Like, parties are taking their own feats by separating a state out of the wishes of the people.
You see, what are the wishes of the people is the key. One way of finding out is to hold a referendum. The other way, you see, we have a representative democracy. That is what we have chosen. Because 1.2 billion people is too large a number to have direct democracy. So, On the Telangana issue, I have no views. I don't know enough whether there should be Telangana or not. But one thing I am quite clear about, that whatever is being played out is not respecting the will of the people. And people, by the way, are on both sides, not only on one side. As a matter of fact, people are on not only two sides, on several sides. So I don't know what to say about Telangana, but I am, given my own mindset, I am skeptical about political functionaries. So I don't think they are doing what is good for the people. This is my inherent bias. But about Telangana, I cannot say with certainty what is right, what is wrong. The next one.
So you talked about running marathons. For youngsters like me who wish to make a political career and some radical changes, two questions, sir. What is an easier path? And second, what is the right path?
What is the?
What is an easier path? And second, what is the right path? Elections or choosing the path of social activism?
You see, your first question contains a negative answer to your question. There is no easy path. One of the things that my students or the students that I taught in the IIM were tired of listening to, whenever they would say, sir, it is very difficult, I would say, who said life is easy? So there is no easy path, my friend. You have to work hard, struggle, fight, persist. That is what a marathon is all about. Not that you take a deep breath and run till your breath runs out, 100 meters are over. Usain Bolt, done. No. You have to plod. And you also said something very interesting. If you want to make a political career, politics is not a career. That is the problem. Politics, in truth, is the most noble of professions. It is public service. We meaning all of us, not only us here, all over the world, we have lost sight and debased politics. As a matter of fact, somebody said, a well-known politician in India said, that I thought politics was the second oldest profession. But it is now becoming the oldest profession. So politics, my friend, is not a career. If you want to do something good for society, you can do that without joining politics also. So if you want to make a career, but also be a socially conscious citizen. Be an active citizen. You see, we have a problem, and this is not the topic for today. We have a problem with our education system. And there are several educationists here, but let me take 2 minutes. We start teaching people in first grade at age 5 how to make a career. Whereas, in my limited understanding of education, in which I have spent several years, education has multiple purposes. The first purpose of education is to make people better human beings. That, with the exception of Ahmedabad University, is not taught anywhere. From every school, the municipal school and the best public schools in the country, because I have seen quite a few, how to be a good human being is not taught. That is what should be done in the primary education. That is the first purpose of education. Well, it has to be learnt, but that learning has to be aided. Opportunities created for that learning. Here we create opportunities. There was a song in some movie, first division आएगी तो घड़ी मिलेगी, रिश्वत. So the first purpose of education is to make people better human beings. The second purpose, in my opinion, is to make them good citizens. Secondary education ought to be for making people better citizens, good citizens, active citizens. And that should be what I call education for citizenship. Unfortunately, our paper in civics teaches us there are 543 members of Lok Sabha. Now, whether there are 543 or 548 or 237, who cares? We are not taught how does the Lok Sabha work? What should it do? What is its purpose? So, secondary purpose of education is education for citizenship. The third, tertiary, is to make people effective contributors to the society, to the economy. And that is what making a career is about. So at your age, I expect you to think of a career. But keep the career as the main focus of your life. I have no question about it, no doubt. But along with making a career in the professional way, also think of our society at large. That should be exercised with care and consideration. After that, do what appeals to you, do what you feel like doing. This urge to do things, nobody tells you what to do. It comes from within. And I have done many things in my life, actually too many. It comes from within and you then stick with it. So your first question is kind of how to make a career in politics. Don't do that. The second was
A choice between contesting elections and social activism.
this is your choice. Contesting elections is a careerist option today. Contesting elections is careerist option. I mean, there is nothing like a professional politician. There are professional public servants. I don't know whether I have answered your question at all. Well, think about it. Yes.
Sir, don't you think at the end of the day, we vote or not, I mean the same set of people come in there and govern our country. Don't you think it's not going to make a difference irrespective of people vote or not? Because there, as you said, you've got a biased, skeptical mindset of the political party, right?
I am almost speechless, you know. You know, if you don't vote, let me tell you as a practical person, if you don't go and vote, between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., your vote is cast. You also know that, don't you?
From this moment, yes.
Before that you didn't. Then I must say you have been living under this garb, ignorance is bliss. Because there is unauthorized voting under one pretext or the other. So if you don't go to vote, you are not doing your most fundamental duty as a citizen, because you are allowing your vote to be misused. The least you need to do at the secondary level of education, as a alive, active, concerned citizen, is to ensure that your vote is not misused. If you think your vote is not going to make a difference, at least go and make sure that your vote is not castable by anybody else. Now we have an option called none of the above. Till September we did not have this option. And since past things should be made transparent, in the last 4 elections I have used the none of the above option, because the provision existed under what is called Rule 49O of the Conduct of Election Rules. The problem was that the secrecy of your vote was violated. You had to sign your name in a register which people could get to know that this person had not voted for anything, and they could harass you. Today we have the nota option. The least you can do is to go and press the nota button. And if I may be rude, because I am known to be that way, particularly with young people. Unless you do that, I refuse to answer your question further. Because the nota today also needs a lot of work to be done. There were two problems, since you have emphatically said you are going to be done, so I'll tell you a little more. Earlier, when you used Rule 49.0, the secrecy of your vote was violated and the votes under 49.0 were not counted. They were considered as wasted votes. Now, since there are electronic machines, the votes under nota are counted. But they don't seem to make a difference. As a matter of fact, a former chief election commissioner wrote in the Hindu newspaper that out of 1,000 voters, if 997 say nota and 2 people vote for candidate A and 1 vote for candidate B, candidate A will be elected. This is obviously ridiculous. What needs to happen is that if nota button gets more votes than any of the candidates, nobody should be declared elected and there should be a fresh election in which those candidates should not be allowed to contest. That is when the purpose of this exercise, which the Supreme Court has written in its judgment, that introduction of nota will encourage political parties to put up better candidates. That should happen. The Supreme Court either has been conservative or it has only provided guidance and wanted implementation to be done by somebody else. The Election Commission has also been conservative. But in the elections to 5 states, nota was used for the first time and there were interesting results. In Delhi, where 0.6% of the votes were cast for nota, 0.6 seems very small, but the total number was about 50,000, which is not small. In one constituency, a candidate who was expected to win lost, but the margin, winning or losing margin, was less than the votes that were polled for nota. So it made a difference to the result. In Chhattisgarh, the percentage of nota overall was 6%. But in some constituencies, as many as 10% votes went to nota. Not that I am asking everybody not to vote for anybody, but as more and more people start getting to know about nota and they express their discomfort with the ailing polity, then if we actually have a situation that nota gets more votes than any of the candidates, it will become morally indefensible for that candidate to be elected. And the Election Commission and the Supreme Court will have to do something about it. So this is also a process. Nota will come into full bloom in about 10 years from now. But till those 10 years, you have to vote for nota. Thank you. Does this clapping mean the end of story?
Appreciating your answer. What?
Oh, okay.
We have already mentioned about the reality of political parties and their relations or their roles in electoral system. What will be the ideal situation or ideal setup for the elections?
I don't know what the ideal would be, but
And furthermore, will it be implemented if you say so?
well, that is a separate question, separate issue. First of all, I said I don't know what the ideal would be, but what I think, political parties, because they are a tool of democratic functioning, they should also function in a democratic way. So, internal democracy in political parties and financial transparency of political parties are two things which we think should happen. Now, will it happen? We are working on financial transparency. We have got income tax returns. We have got them declared public authorities. Now, 2 days ago, we have got notices issued by the Information Commission to these 6 political parties as to why have you not implemented our decision and appointed public information officers. So that action is going on parallelly. On internal democracy, we have, there is a bill which is proposed for the internal functioning of political parties, prepared by a committee led by Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, who was a former Supreme Court Chief Justice. We have been taking that bill around the country. We have shared it with political parties. They don't like it, of course. But we have to work at it. You see, political parties are not our enemy. We are, and we and they. I use we and they, but we are not different. I mean, if we say they are bad, where do politicians come from? This guy wants to become a politician. He has gone away? No, he is still here. So, if tomorrow or after 10 years he becomes a politician, he would not become a bad person. He will join a system which will kind of overpower him. I mean, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who says Dr. Manmohan Singh is a bad man? If people say he is inefficient, he is incompetent, nobody says he is bad. But he had to tell a lie that he was a resident of Assam. Good man. So the system requires him. Left to himself, he will not tell a lie. So we have to change that system. So political parties are part of the system, so are you and me. We have to take responsibility for it. Not say, "Main to bada acha hu, ye kharab hai." That's not going to work. So we have to make political parties internally democratic. We are trying to do it staying outside the political parties. The people in Aam Aadmi Party were also trying to do that, but they were challenged. They were told, "You are outside the system, you come in, then we will see." They took up the challenge, or they took up the bait. We have been also told, I have been told by Manishankar Iyer, and I said, I will join politics when I feel like joining it, not when you tell me to join it. So there are different ways of doing the same thing. So whether it will happen or not, I don't know, but it is our business, yours and mine, to make it happen. And think of ways how to make it happen. Yes, sir. Well, I normally don't comment about individual politicians. And I have not seen the interview, I have read about it. I don't see television. But I think he fumbled, it seems, based on reading. He does not, apparently did not come across as a seasoned politician. Now whether that is a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. And Rahul Gandhi is also part of a system, and the system for him begins with his family. So it is much more closer to him, you know. If this guy, what is your name? Shreyans. If Shreyans becomes a politician, at least his family will not be harassing him. His friends may be harassing him. But Rahul Gandhi is also, you know, he was born into it. So I think his situation is very different from, he is not an ordinary person. So his interview, I mean, some people have criticized his interview. A lot of people say he was very honest and very straightforward. I have not seen it. I have only read about it in the newspapers. But systemic change is what is called for. And it does not happen in a day. But he has also been trying to do elections in the Youth Congress and all that, and he is trying to do primaries in 15, 17 constituencies. Interestingly, in 2 constituencies where he wanted primaries done, those people said, "Don't do it because I want my ticket." And he has changed that. So you don't know what is going to happen. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
You describe the way in which the politicians have used our constitution and the structure through which the elections work. And they have mastered the art over a period of time. There are obviously checks and balances, but over a period of time, they've seen to it that they become impotent. They become ineffective. They're maneuvered in such a way that those checks and balances are brought down. At the same time, from what you have described, it is clear that there are still some of these checks and balances where there are people who make them work, whether it is Supreme Court, whether it is some of the officers like the CIC to whom you went and he gave this particular interpretation in your favor. So like that, there are these other organs of the government, which at least so far have some sense protected the real justice in the system. This is what transpires. But I have a question. It is true that some of them have been found to be effective. My question is that politicians also come from this same society as many others. To what extent this subversion has penetrated all various sectors as well as the various organs? Because on that depends as to whether and how and in what time will we come out of this, or will we improve, as you put it. Otherwise, as Amar mentioned, we'll get what we deserve.
The people of Ahmedabad University work together, support each other. I think it is, first of all, there is no comprehensive answer to your question. I will only respond to what I can and the way I can. And I think it has something to do with the story, not story, I believe it is a scientific fact, that if you put a frog in water and put that saucepan on a fire, as the temperature of the water rises, the skin of the frog adjusts to that temperature and it can withstand a range of temperatures. And it is said that the frog will boil to death but not jump out because it would not realize what is happening. Now I think in a dramatic way, Indian society has gone through that kind of a phenomenon. We, all of us, have allowed our system to degenerate slowly, what is called the creep phenomenon. You keep stretching things and you think that they will come to a breaking point, but they don't, they stretch a little more. So I think we are at a point where it is becoming a little impossible. Let's take corruption. I've been asked about corruption many times, and I also believe, and I'll come back to the story, corruption, there is no society in the world where there is zero corruption. And there was corruption in ancient times also. But today corruption seems to have become so rampant that it has become dysfunctional to the day-to-day functioning of society. Now when it reaches that level, then either the frog dies or it flutters to come out. I think Indian society is close to that point. And the struggles that we see going on are manifestations of the frog trying to come out. for the sake of these young folks, I hope we come out. And I have often told people, I live in Delhi in a place where across a park, there is a huge slum, very large. I have been telling people in my society, whoever are interested in listening to me, that unless if we keep thinking that we must keep these people out of this park, one day these people will come here and they will enter your house and say, Acha, you have 3 bedrooms, 1 drawing room, 1 dining room, so 5 rooms, and there are 3 people. So you stay in 1 room and 4 families will stay in 4 rooms. Because that is how those people are actually staying now. I have walked every morning, I go there sometime. So they will do that. And then there will be no choice. So I think that is the kind of situation of social strife. And without scandalizing or scaring the young people, 1/3 of the land mass of the country is not under state control. The problem is very serious. And that is why all this, chatpatawing, something should happen. Otherwise, thing will go out of hand. Obviously, it is not a one-day thing. When an elephant dies, it takes a long time for it to die. And Indian democracy is not going to die in a hurry. It will ail for a long time, at least till my lifetime. So I think that is where we are. There are good people everywhere, but their number and the number of people who say like this young man, why should I vote? There are friends of mine from the railways who keep telling me, nothing is going to happen, you are wasting your time. Now in the last 1 year, some of them have started saying, yaar, tu to kuch kar raha hai. So I think there seems to be hope, and there has to be hope. How can 1.2 billion people decide that this country is dead? The world will also die. We just can't do that. And these young people will not allow us to do that. That's all I can say. Thank you.